Welcome back to Insights by Design. Today we're joined by Alex Merced. Alex, how are you?
Hey, Andrew. Thanks for having me on the show. Hey, my name is Alex Merced, developer advocate. Well, I guess now senior technical evangelist here at Dremio. And I'm really excited to be on the show.
Thank you so much. And by the time this drops, I will have started at Dremio. We'll be working together and
that's right.
Be meeting up at Subsurface in New York City. And Alex, you mentioned that your title right now at Dremio is Senior Tech Evangelist. For those who don't know, what is a Senior Tech Evangelist?
I think of technical evangelist as in the same realm as DevRel or developer relations. And the basic idea is this: you have the marketing team, and the marketing team really knows about sort of like, okay, hey, what's the target market? Okay, how do we communicate in a way that's going to sort of connect with the right audience? Then you have the engineers who really understand the product. But then when you're a company like Dremio that's basically trying to sell a product to a technical audience, sometimes you need people who kind of straddle both worlds, who basically know how to communicate really well and identify sort of who they're talking to, but also really understand the deeper depths of the technical side to be able to kind of really communicate authentically to that technical audience about sort of what is the product and like, why do you care and why might it be valuable? And that's sort of in the realm that I operate in. So basically, whether it's writing technical blogs that help people to go do hands-on tutorials to get use things like Dremio or Apache Iceberg or things like that, or speaking at events to help people understand these technologies. I think of it as like a heavy wallop of education in a technical and a little pinch of marketing.
I love it. And as a tech evangelist, tech evangelism isn't a very common title. It is a position that's growing in popularity because I think companies are seeing the impact that folks like yourself are having. But in terms of your own origin story, you've got a varied background from being an entrepreneur to a marketing director, to a stockbroker, to a financial services educator, and now as a senior tech evangelist. What was your career arc, and what were maybe some of those highlights and key decisions that you made along the way?
Got it. Okay, I'll try to do the TLDR version of the origin story. But essentially, a little background. I was always really into technology as a kid. So basically, I was raised by a single mom. So during my childhood, she was kind of going to college while working like two jobs. So finding childcare wasn't always the easiest thing. So oftentimes when she would go to class, she would leave me and my brother in the computer lab. And so I would like play on the computer lab and make websites with GeoCities and learn HTML and all that kind of stuff. So that kind of got me into it. I also was really into video games, wanted to be a video game developer. So I cut my teeth with things like RPG Maker, where I'd make like role-playing games. So that taught me a lot of like the technical programmatic thinking type stuff at a very early age. And I did end up going to school for computer science, but then I got really into music, started playing guitar and totally went in a different direction and started getting into more communications and marketing. So during my time in college, I kind of made that pivot, and during that time I ended up starting a hobby gaming store. So like comic books, Magic cards, Counter-Strike. It was a good time. So that taught me a lot about entrepreneurship and also marketing, because I had to market the business and think about how we're going to promote it. And that was initially successful. Where we made our mistakes was cash management and, planning for when business isn't good. But lessons learned. It was a really good education. And then also starting my own concert promotions company while I was in college, because I didn't drive. So the only way I could see bands was to bring them to me. So, a big theme in my life, or the way I like to think about things, is that when I can't go somewhere through the front door, to find the other doors and go through it the long way around. But there's always a way to where you want to go, has been sort of the mantra. But yeah, so I ended up graduating. I ended up working briefly in marketing with a shoe brand, which was a really interesting experience, having to like do liaisons with their PR company. At the same time, I'm training to become a stockbroker, because again, at this point, I don't know what I'm going to do. So I'm trying to do a little bit of everything. I passed my licensing. I'm still looking to see, hey, what other options I have. And I end up being found by this company called Greco Financial Training that trains people for their licensing exams. And they needed someone who was technical to help them develop their online curriculum, or at least the technical aspects of it. So they brought me on. I started learning the material, and I already knew a lot of it because I had just taken these exams. And over time, I ended up becoming not only an instructor, but eventually the main instructor for like all the courses, traveling the world, training people. So that one, I cut my chops on a lot of sort of content creation there. I ended up wearing all hats, processing orders, marketing the company, doing all the training, creating all the online training. It was intense. So I learned how to have a lot on my plate very early on. But eventually I got tired of being in New York. So being in finance kind of ties you to New York. So I ended up deciding to go back to technology where I started. I had been dabbling in programming always. Like there was never, so I ended up doing like a web development boot camp. I ended up working as a web developer for several years. And in the boot camp that trained me, they noticed that I was making content for my fellow students while I was doing it. So they ended up hiring me as well. So I'm doing training software developers while working as a software developer, which was great. But eventually I'm like, you know what? I'm really enjoying creating content. I have thousands of videos on YouTube, blogs, whatnot, because I just like learning and then sharing what I learn. So I was like, I learned about this whole role of like developer advocacy, developer relations, and I start applying. I meet Dremio. Dremio ends up sort of winning me over. It's a really cool technology and a real cool space I was really excited to learn about. And yeah, so basically now all of those things that I've done in the past kind of all rolled in as far as like whether it's on the marketing side and entrepreneurial side of things, whether it's the content creation, education side of things, or the technical development side of things, all that kind of really wraps in this position, which is why it's such a heavily sought out position, because it's really hard to find people who have that kind of weird Cuisinart of experiences and skills. But it's a very fun position because it can be very high impact.
I think that's one of the reasons we get along is we both have a varied background with a lot of skills that you don't typically get with just the traditional career track required for an evangelism role. And you and I may have met earlier then, because I come from financial services, leading supervision and compliance at several of the large brokerage firms. I have my 7, 24, 63, 65, and 10. And I used to hire Graco to train my employees. So if that was you, then we may have met before.
Got it. Okay, yeah. If you bought materials through Graco, I worked there from 2008 to 2019. Was it 2019? Yeah, 2019. So especially if they bought any of the online training materials, then they probably, whoever was trading with those materials definitely saw me on a very regular basis.
100%. See, our paths have crossed more than once.
Yes. No, it's weird. Like I definitely run into people who know me from that online training, who now see me in this space, and it's like, oh, okay, small world. Actually, the person who trained me from i7, I think she works in the data side now in Austin and software development now. So it's very, 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 very interesting world.
Yeah, finance is a small world, smaller than you'd think.
It is.
And one of your more recent accomplishments is writing the Apache Iceberg, the definitive guide through O'Reilly. What was that experience like?
That was interesting. It was writing a book, especially writing a textbook, was not something I had on my bucket list. So essentially just all kickstarted naturally. What happened is that we had done an event, a meetup with someone who did a book for data mesh, and they did it with Manning. And I found like they had this program called MEEP, it was called like the Manning Early Access Program, where you can write the book little by little. And I was like, okay, this is an interesting angle. This would be we were creating a lot of content around Apache Iceberg. So I thought this would be a good outlet for that. So I approached Dremio. I'm like, hey, this would be something good to do for our area for the tech evangelism team at the time. Because now, before it was a tech evangelism team under the product department. Now, technically, the operation is under the marketing department, but essentially does the same thing. But at the time, I was like, hey, let's try this. And they're like, okay, well, if we're gonna do it, let's do it. Let's see if O'Reilly would be interested. So I reached out to O'Reilly. And that began a conversation, which led to everyone being on the same page, and we wrote the book. And basically, me and the other authors, we just kind of divvied up the work. And things change as several of the other authors eventually transitioned away from Dremio by the end. It got interesting, but it was a good experience. I had a really good time with the editors over there at O'Reilly. I had a really good time putting together the book. It really forced me to kind of like just dive real deep, really kind of also up my writing game. And then the response has been amazing. Like the number of people will tell me who they've read the early release copies, they've learned from it, have taken actions on it. Again, not something I expected to do, but something I'm really proud of and very excited that I got to do.
It's a really good book. It's robust. I'm sure it took a lot of deep thinking to both get the concepts correct, but then to put it in a logical and well-articulated order. I got the PDF, I think from you, and I use an app called Speechify, which lets celebrities read PDFs to you. So you sound like Snoop Dogg in my head.
Yeah.
I had Snoop Dogg read the whole book to me.
Now I'm just imagining that.
It's awesome. Now that I've heard your real voice, it's a little bit ruined for me, but you'll always be Snoop Dogg in my head to me.
Me too now.
With the writing and all the videos and short form and LinkedIn posts, which do you find the most engaging and which do you find the most challenging?
I feel like I've gotten to a decent cadence with like blogs and videos. Basically, like I write what I would want, in a sense that when I think what content I would want is like stuff that's going to help me get hands-on quickly and easily and help me understand why I'm getting hands-on. And I write content from that angle. So a lot of the tutorials generally do really well. Same thing with like the videos where I always try to walk through things, especially training people in finance, where I was training people who were ranged from people changing their careers very late in life to people who just dropped out of high school, looking to be, get their Series 7, Series 63, Series 24, depending on the context. I had to learn out of very early on, like, okay, how do I break an idea down to to its simplest understandable, like, takeaway? So in the sense when I do videos, I always try this, and also learning to assume that the people who are watching or consuming your content know nothing. And not that not in a pejorative way, but in a sense to make sure that you cover all the legwork for them to be able to follow what you're doing, because you don't know where they're starting from. So that's always very conscious in my mind when I write content, and making sure that like I don't use terms that I don't explain. I don't forget to provide context. Which can be an easy thing to do, because oftentimes you forget the things that you forget that you didn't always know the things you didn't know, because you just kind of like assume it's always been there after a while. So that's gone really well. And then LinkedIn, I think, has gone pretty well as well. There's been definitely a good LinkedIn following that's built up. Where I generally do find a little bit trickier is oftentimes like Twitter. Like I don't expect, to really be like setting the data space on fire on like Instagram or TikTok. But Twitter has been a little tricky as far as like being able to sort of really connect with the community, because it is more conversation based. I'm definitely more of a broadcaster, doing like usually speaking at a much more like a basically speaking from a more educational standpoint. Like I always talk more like I'm in front of a classroom teaching. So a lot of my best bits aren't as conversational. So that's been sort of where I've been trying to learn and adapt more into sort of like those conversational spaces of community building.
With writing and with recorded video, we have the benefit of post. It's not live, but you also present at a lot of live conferences, both in person and online. What's your strategy for having a successful live presentation?
Again, I just approach it from the same way I did from when I was teaching in finance. So basically, have a very sort of clear idea of what is the point. So like basically saying, hey, I want them to walk away with this. And then generally having sort of like each slide in my slideware having sort of like a takeaway, and then always having a lot of stories. Like basically always trying to, and analogies. Like analogies are also one of my favorite things, being able to kind of take really complex ideas and attach them to things that are not complex and very understandable and relatable. So as long as I do that, whether it's in person or virtual or writing, it tends to go pretty well, because then people can latch onto the ideas in a way that's sustainable. And that's my end goal. My goal is like, hey, you can take away what I said, and it's not something that, hey, like is in your mind today, kind of fuzzily and then disappears, but it's something that will sort of resonate for time, and then you'll start, some of the analogies that I'll point out become patterns that you don't just see in the thing that I was talking about, but you start noticing those patterns in other places in life. To kind of just show like, hey, most truths all kind of come from some very typical patterns.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Identifying patterns with stories and analogies definitely aids in learning and for recall. And with your role, you travel around, you meet a lot of interesting people. Has there been a person where you've met where you were just blown away? You're like, oh, this is awesome.
I don't know if there's just one. I can think of a lot of people who I've enjoyed meeting. In particular, I really enjoy meeting Dremio customers. Mainly, it's like I love the product, and I've gotten hands on with the product. But it's different when they're hearing people who are using it at much larger scales and just kind of hearing, the successes and challenges. It just kind of in my role gives me additional context for seeing of how people are using it in different typical industries, which I find fascinating. But also, it's like oftentimes when you meet these people, like especially when they're using like a particular product, there's not many people that can really have like, it's like if I use X product, there's a finite number of people in the world I can have a conversation to about that. So when I meet them, oftentimes they're really excited to have someone they can just sit down and have a conversation with about their usage of Dremio, because I'm someone who can kind of relate to their experience or understand their experiences. So they tend to be very fun, engaging conversations because there's that level of relation. But also, I just really enjoy oftentimes seeing talks that get into the architecture of things. Like I definitely like to know how the bits and bobs connect and work together. So I've written a lot of pieces about sort of like the architecture of the different table formats. And that's just seeing a lot of talks about that, whether they've been pre-recorded or in person. I always find fascinating, like not just sort of like why the things work, but like why they chose not to do it in alternative ways, which is another reason why I love reading the Iceberg mailing list, because you can see like different approaches to the same problem and how they kind of converse and work their way to saying, hey, let's, like right now they're having this big discussion about, hey, how do we implement materialized views in Iceberg? And there's like 5 different possible ways they can do it. And there's all these pros and cons. And it's just fascinating to kind of watch them like work through sort of the logic of the possible and the pros and cons of each method. And I find that stuff super fascinating because it also then allows me to think through other problems that I may face in the future more critically, because I can think through those pros and cons and apply them in different places.
You can definitely feel your interest and your passion through your writing and through your content creation. And we've mentioned a couple core concepts, one being Apache Iceberg, and secondly, the Dremio data lakehouse. Can you explain a little bit, what is Apache Iceberg and how does that relate to Dremio's products?
Got it. Okay, so basically, the best way to kind of see is first see, let's just say like the problem, because basic problem and solution. And the problem we have nowadays is that for a long time, we've generally oftentimes parked most of our data in a single database or a data warehouse, or a few, or like you basically had one database and one data warehouse. And that was fine. You basically, most of the time your data there wasn't so much data that basically that one database, that one data warehouse could handle the bulk of your queries. There wasn't need to be moving around between different systems as much. So that was fine. And that was very convenient. But now we're running into the point where the scale of data, the number of data, it's so large, the amount of data, that it doesn't really work well coming right out of a database or a data warehouse, particularly for analytical purposes. And 2, the different types of use cases you have, there really just isn't going to be one tool that can do everything that you need to do with that data set. So there's just a scaling issue that's become sort of difficult. But there is one place that your data is kind of exposed or can be exposed to all tools, and that is a data lake, which is essentially generally a sort of in the middle storage layer. So you just generally have like what's called a Hadoop cluster or an object storage, but bottom line, somewhere to store data, that's kind of, you just store the big chunk of all that data in the middle. But the problem is it's just the dumping ground. So it hasn't really been the greatest place to work from. And this is where Apache Iceberg comes in. So Apache Iceberg is in a category referred to as a data lakehouse table format that basically provides this metadata about the data that's in your data lake that allows tools like Dremio to be able to operate at a much more advanced, more efficient level. Almost basically treat your storage layer like it's a database, like it's basically as if it were Postgres, but it's your S3 buckets. And on top of that, so this pattern of basically turning your data lake into a data warehouse is called a data lakehouse. But there's a lot of pieces to it. It's not just, hey, what table format do I have? But then there's like, hey, how do I track those tables? A catalog. And okay, hey, how do I run queries against those tables? There's all these different pieces that you would normally have to modularly put together and maintain and manage, which can be a lot of work. So the benefit is you get the flexibility, but you also get all this work of maintenance. So this is where Dremio, a data lakehouse platform, kind of acts as like a wrapper around all of it, making the whole process really easy. It makes basically enabling or executing or implementing a data lakehouse as easy as just starting up a Snowflake account. Basically you just start up Dremio, you connect it to your data lake, and you can begin running pretty much all the SQL you're used to and do all the types of modeling you're used to in a data warehouse, but just as easily right on top of your data lake storage at a much lower cost point and with fewer steps to get to where you're delivering the data, allowing you to deliver that data faster to where you need it. So that's the high level of it.
And we've seen in the digital transformation that's ongoing, but really kicked off a couple of years ago, moving from on-prem to the cloud. Sometimes people move back and have more of a hybrid approach. We saw a lot of companies reevaluating their data stack. Then we had the modern data stack era where we just kind of plugged everything together. There's a program to do everything within the data lifecycle. But now with AI coming down, and this is a top-down directive, often from boards saying we need to figure out how to use AI, specifically generative AI, so that we don't fall behind. What are some of the use cases for how Dremio may be able to help companies in their AI strategy?
Got it. Okay, so I'll put that into sort of two categories. There's ways that generative AI has made the Dremio experience better, and there's ways that Dremio has enabled the usage of generative AI in other companies. Probably the best example where you can actually see we've done a lot of content with a fairly well-known company named Merced, what they've done is that they've been able to use Dremio, because Dremio not only enables you to treat your data lake like a data warehouse, but it also allows you to bring in all your data from other data sources. So it really allows you to kind of create one place where all your data kind of exists and is accessible and governable. So essentially, they've been able to kind of filter all their data through Dremio, so that way when they build their LLM platform for asking analytical questions within the firm, it basically all feeds off Dremio, and they don't have to necessarily wrangle data from a bunch of places because Dremio's already done that for them. So now you can just go in there and say, hey, I want give me the what's the quarterly sales for this particular shipping container or something like that. They can type out the sentence, and then it's going to go fish out the data from Dremio, create the visualization, give you back the answers, all done, using prompts. So that's something that Merced has developed. But also part of the Dremio interface, we've added some generative AI nice bits to make life a little bit easier. Like two things that people have a challenge with is, one, Dremio makes it really easy to work with SQL. And SQL definitely democratizes who can work with your analytical data, but there's still people who don't know SQL. Okay, so I would say, hey, SQL is probably easier than Python in a lot of, especially on the analytical side. And, oftentimes, but also there's a lot of times where people do a lot of analytics and never need to touch SQL or Python. So Dremio does, have tools available in that, whether they're little drop-down wizards, but also a text to SQL feature where you can identify the data sets you're working with, write a question, and it'll generate the SQL to express that question. And then two, we have generative AI for documentation. So a nice thing about having all your data coalesce with Dremio is that you can actually have a wiki so that we can write documentation. And so that way, no matter where my data is, I can kind of understand my data all from one pane. And now there's a generative AI feature to help you where it'll scan the schema of your table and be able to generate some basic documentation on that table based on what it can infer from the data and the schema. So that way to help it make it easier to write documentation and populate that wiki. There's a bunch of other stuff coming on the way, but these are sort of the first steps. But bottom line is Dremio allows you to sort of really wrangle all your data together, making it easier to execute AI that's working on data across many disparate sources. And two, again, we have some nice AI features that just make working with Dremio a lot easier.
I love that. Dremio is known in the industry for being innovative, for iterating quickly, and also for having an amazing UI. And I think that doubling down on that and continuing to roll out those amazing features is right within Dremio's culture and reputation. And a lot of these features will be demoed at the upcoming Subsurface conference. What are some of the things you're looking forward to at Subsurface?
One, the announcements. Okay, I can't spoil the announcements yet, but trust me, there's going to be some really cool announcements during the keynotes over there at Subsurface. So do register and we'll catch it online if you can. But also there's going to be some really interesting talks. There's always a lot of Iceberg related talks, and Iceberg has definitely been one of the spaces that I'm most involved in. So oftentimes I'll be moderating a panel on Apache Iceberg as well, talking about sort of what the future of Apache Iceberg looks like with people from Tabular, which is a catalog company founded by the initial creators of Iceberg, AWS, who has really made a lot of imprints in the Iceberg space as well, and a couple of people from the Nessie project and Dremio kind of talking about what we're doing with Iceberg, because we've been involved with Iceberg pretty much from early stages and really putting a big bet on sort of, hey, and that's why our platform is probably one of the most robust platforms for Iceberg because we really saw where Iceberg was going very early on and really invested heavily on building and working to build the best platform for working with Apache Iceberg as possible. There's definitely a lot of things to come to make it even better. But I mean, it definitely makes, it makes working with Iceberg as easy as if you were just working with your run-of-the-mill data warehouse with all the with equal or better performance and a pretty easy UI.
Yeah, I completely agree. And for those who are looking to learn more about Iceberg or get hands-on, what are some of your favorite resources to either learn conceptually or to actually build something?
If you want to learn conceptually, what I would do is I've done this talk called The Who, What, and Why of Data Lake Table Formats. I've done it at several different places, so you can find probably several different recordings now on YouTube. And I'll be doing it again. The next time I'm actually doing it at Denver Dev Day. So for anyone who's going to be in the Denver area, I'll be doing that talk at Denver Dev Day live. And I've done it, and then by the time this airs, I'll have done it. I'll have just done it for the Miami data scientist meetup. So that should probably be posted online somewhere. But if you look up who, what, and where of Data Lake Table Formats, you'll find that talk. And then 2, to get hands-on, I just published 3 blogs. Each of them are like an end-to-end data engineering exercise, starting with data in a database, taking that data in a database, moving it to an Iceberg table using Dremio, and then building a dashboard on that data using Apache Superset. And you can do that all from your laptop. So no cloud bills involved. They're pretty straightforward and easy. All you need is Docker. And all of those you can find at the Dremio blog at dremio.com/blog. And I highly recommend those. I think those give you a really full picture of what that whole end-to-end process would look like.
And I can vouch for your tutorials. They're fun, they are interesting, and they're very easy to follow. So I can tell that you have a training experience in your background. And one other opportunity is that you also host several podcasts. Could you just give a brief overview of each podcast and which one do you find your favorite?
Probably the newest one that I started is the one that I've been finding my favorite because it's just like a little bit more focused specifically on open source. So it's called Catalogs, Metadata, and Manifest Oh My. Or I think it's Catalogs, Manifest, and Metadata Oh My. But the idea is that it's right now I'm mainly going through episodes where I'm explaining a lot of the concepts in Apache Iceberg and how Apache Iceberg works. But the long run of the podcast, I'll be going through several different open source data projects, including Apache Arrow, Nessie, and others, and kind of discussing sort of what their role is, what the sort of the vision of the project is, and giving sort of really the idea being that just really educate on sort of what the open source options are. I also have Data Nation, which is probably my longest running podcast in the data space, where I just talk about sort of any data concept that I find interesting or news, or it's just basically, I got something to say, I'll put it there. If it doesn't fall into one of the other categories. I have In the Grand Scheme of Things, where I talk a little bit more focused on modeling. So I'll talk about I'll have like an episode on Data Vault, or talking about modeling data for like incremental ingestion. So it's more focused on like, hey, what should the schema be? And then I have Select Star from Data Lake, which it's just, I'll talk specifically more. That's going to be more Dremio specific stuff. And then I think there's one more. I think that kind of covers. There's Gnarly Dataways. Now, Gnarly Dataways is a little bit unique because that is the official sort of webinar series of Dremio. So oftentimes, while I'm the host, we generally have guests on who are doing, presenting different technical stuff about the data lakehouse. And there's always, now I think we're about 50 episodes. So all that back catalog is on YouTube as well. And one final one is I have a podcast called Web and Data Interviews where I interview people. It's very sporadic. So maybe like once every couple of months, I'll interview someone. But that's another one where I'll interview people from either the web or data space. Just talking about sort of what their career is, their backstory, the projects that they're working on. And like, I think the most recent one I did was with Shantona Tuli from Upsolver, talking about Upsolver, which is like a streaming platform, which can be used to stream into Iceberg, which can then be read with Dremio. And like just showing you the sort of the composability when you're working with Apache Iceberg lakehouses.
I love it. You're a constant creator in all the different mediums. If you could have one dream guest on your podcast, who would that be?
Honestly, probably wouldn't even be web and data related. I would just love to have like Claudio Sanchez, lead singer of Coheed and Cambria, on and just chat with him about just like I've been a huge fan of that band since the first album, and I crossed paths with him once, but never really like had a conversation. So it'd be cool to just kind of like just like see like how's life these days.
That's right. Maybe you can make it happen. Having so many podcasts, I'm sure you can get a media pass and maybe attend an event.
I need to start taking advantage of that more.
Well, Alex, thank you so much for your time today. What events do you have coming up, or any blogs or videos that you want to make sure that the audience is aware of?
Basically, I will be speaking at Denver Dev Day, which will be on May 31st at Denver. I will be speaking at the AI Generative AI Tools Summit. It's like an online virtual event. If you go to mlopsworld.com, you can find the information for that event. What I'm speaking on, I have to find out. I have to remember which submission got accepted. I just found out literally an hour ago. So I'll be speaking at that, and then I will be speaking at the Merced Storage Conference. This is going to be in Santa Clara, California, on June 4th. And then we'll be doing a couple of meetups at the Dremio offices that week as well. I will basically be posting about all of these very regularly, so definitely make sure to follow me on LinkedIn. Just look up my name and basically that, or Twitter, and you'll be getting a lot of this information straight all the time in your feed. So definitely click that button to follow me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Alex, it was a pleasure meeting with you, and
always.
Great Friday and a good weekend.
You too. You have a great Friday and a great weekend.